Hello all you YouTube people. I have the impossible task of attempting to prove that Jesus has already been appointed as Caesar to mankind and actually becomes Caesar to mankind next Sabbath on Chislev the 5th, 2022. Having been appointed Caesar on Tishri 16, 2022, after Satan's final 42-month lease of Revelation 13 ended on Tishri 14, 2022. I have 15 different proofs of that date, which are all on understanding 659, understanding 659.html on truebiblecode.com. And the significance of this couldn't be greater, and I have such a difficult job of explaining it because the techniques and the scriptural understandings necessary to credibly deliver the proofs are a little bit above most people's pay grade, but not in terms of intellectual complexity, but in terms of credibility. And Satan, of course, is the master of credibility and anti-credibility. Anyway, probably the simplest proof, in fact definitely the simplest proof, is the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 in verse 24, and then there's the 62 plus 7 weeks in verse 25. And verse 25 says that the 62 or the 7 or both weeks begins with the going forth of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, in this country, in Britain, the Reformation began in 1532. There was an Act of Parliament towards the end of the year. I mean, in 1532, May 15th, there was a Convocation of Canterbury, which agreed the submission of the clergy, but there was an Act, the 24th of Henry VIII. It was the 12th Act out of 13 in the year 1532. And if you sort of spread them out throughout the year, what that means is the Act would have been enacted around about November, December, which was Chislev. So that is when the word went forth in this country to reform the Church of England. And of course it occurred because poor old Henry was trying to get himself a son, and the Roman Catholic Church wouldn't let him divorce his wife, so he couldn't do it. Actually, Moses did grant divorces. Certificate of divorce he granted, and Jesus explained that God permitted it because of the hard-heartedness of the Jews, but he did permit it. And he said, those whom God hath yoked together, let no man put asunder. And what he means by that, God yokes two parents together, two spouses together, through a kid, because he downloads his spirit, which is his DI, not his AI, his divine intelligence, his operating system for humans, his self-learning operating system. We are software in hardware. So the character of the person, the self-learning, self-writing character of the person, that is the real image of God. Your body is not in the image of God particularly, but your judgment, however flawed it may be, that process, that is in the image of God. Your software is in the image of God. And it has the capability one day to become a God. Your body doesn't. So when God downloads that software into a fetus, which he does at midterm of pregnancy, incidentally, to all you Americans out there, I know it's a massively divisive subject, abortion or not abortion. Clinton wrote a very good book, I think, so I've alienated all the Republicans already. I am actually Republican in my leaning at the moment, not because I'm right-wing, but because the Republicans are in the centre at the moment, centre-left actually. Here's the deal. God puts the Spirit, His Spirit, He blew it into the nostrils of Adam, and it stands for the day when you get your operating system downloaded into the brain of the fetus. And you can't do that till both halves of the brain have joined up. Crudely speaking, one half of the brain is your heart and the other half of the brain is your mind. Crudely speaking, in symbolic terms. But once they're linked up, anyway, you get this massive burst in cerebral activity, and that's about week 19, which is halfway through a 38-week gestation. So it is not murder of a human being at 18 weeks to abort. It is murder of a human being at 20 weeks to abort. So I would, as a church, our position is that you're not guilty of murder if you have an abortion up to 18 weeks, and you are if you have an abortion from 20 weeks further on. Between 18 and 20, I don't know what to say about it. It may or may not be murder. So that we understand to be the biblical position. And once that spirit is downloaded into the kid, then God has yoked together the parents, and you cannot as a church, and you should not as a government, grant a divorce until that child itself has got yoked to someone else through a marriage. Because Adam said that a man will leave his father and mother and join with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So once that occurs, the parents are released, they're no longer yoked. So the way we put it in our doctrine is that if the kid has got engaged or got married or had a kid without getting married and engaged, or reached the age of 20, then you're released from it. But until then, if those things haven't happened and your kid is under 20, not married, and hasn't itself and not engaged, and hasn't himself or herself had a child, then you're yoked together. Now Henry didn't have any kids. Well, he did. He had Elizabeth, didn't he? I'm not quite sure from whom. So some of those divorces the Bible would have permitted. Anyway, he then formed the Church of Henry. And it wasn't such a dumb idea. It was no less... it was founded it wasn't founded in adultery, to be fair, because God does grant divorce so long as you're not yoked by a child. So I've often accused the Church of England of being founded in adultery and therefore being a false church. I think that may be a little bit too harsh. And the scriptures are more glowing. The Reformation was a positive step. It was a breakaway from a strangling, politically motivated, over-controlling, corrupted Church of Rome. A church which murdered or arranged, like the Pharisees, condemned Jesus and pushed the crowd to condemn him. So the Roman Catholic Church condemned with De Heretico Carborundum anybody who had the Bible in their native tongue, ignoring the brilliant argument of Tyndale, which was that the Bible was written in the native tongue of the people to whom it was given, Hebrew to the Jews and Greek to the Greeks. And so that is the archetype, that is the Well, that is the proof that it was meant to be in the language that the people could understand. And he was killed by the Roman Catholic Church by pressure from them. And Wycliffe, who preceded him in translating the Bible into English, he died of natural causes. But not satisfied with that, the Pope at the time exhumed his body and burnt it. But he made the symbolic mistake of throwing the ashes in the river Swift, and it was very swift after that the Bible became popular. And in fact, all the literacy in this country, and hence in the entire English-speaking world, derives from the desire of the peasants to read God's book. And they were called the lollards, because they used to loll around reading this book in astonishment. The reason they learned to read is to read the Bible. That is why the English-speaking world is literate, and that is what the Catholic Church tried everything in their power to prevent. However, the Reformation was a liberation. It's a bit like Elon Musk buying Twitter, hopefully. The idea is to empower the people rather than the stakeholders of the destructive and suffocating orthodoxy, whether it be religious or whether it be political. So you count 70 weeks of years, which is 490 years, from 1532 Chislev, when the Act of Parliament beginning the Reformation was passed. And you end up with Chislev 2022, which, and today is Heshvan 28, so it begins in 3 days' time. And what that means is that the Reformation is completed this year, in this country actually, which means that we shall complete Solomon's temple, greater temple, this year. It also means that Jesus, the leader, the Messiah, arrives this year, although he actually arrives after, well, ambiguity. He normally arrives after 69 weeks, which would be 7 years ago, which is 2015. Which is what you get if you add the 7 weeks of verse 25 to the 62 weeks. But there's also a further week in verse 27. So if you add the whole lot up, you get 70 weeks. Put it like this: Jesus has to have appeared within the 70 weeks. And what that means is, that's to do with the church, isn't it? It's to do with the church. It means he will come to the temple of whichever true Christian church, whichever church is the true Christian church, he will do that this year. Let's put it like that. Okay, so I guess that proves the significance of 2022 from a spiritual standpoint. It does not prove it from a secular standpoint. But it does identify this year beautifully, in a simple way. Now we go to more complicated and less easy to persuade ways. And so let me start with the simplest of those, which is the following. In Mark 5, there's a guy called Legion, because he's got 6,000 demons in him. There were 6,000 Roman soldiers in the Legion. And he says, my name is Legion because there's many of us. And the precise number in a legion is 6,000. And they said, when Jesus was going to expel them, they said, could we go in the pigs, please? Jesus said, fine. They went in the pigs. There were 2,000 pigs. And then they jumped over the cliff, the overhang, into the lake, and they drowned in the waters of the lake. And one of the interpretations of that is that demons possess people. A pig represents a human with unclean flesh possessed by a demon. in that account, because they were all possessed by demons, in fact by multiple demons, 3 each on average. And there are 2,000 days of demon possession whenever they are permitted to come down here. There were 2,000 days in the first presence, which covered the entirety of Jesus' ministry, which is 42 months, which is 1260 days, roughly. And there are 2,000 days of demon possession at the end, at the time of the end, in the 21st century, in the last ministry. But because the demons were thrown out of heaven for 2,000 days, in order that Jesus could have his ministry, and because that occurred in the middle of Satan's 6,000-year lease as Caesar to mankind, which he procured from Michael by giving him his firstborn angelic rights in the greater bowl of soup deal between Esau and Jacob. That's the greater meaning of that deal. Because of that, he has to get 2,000 days back, because he got booted out by agreement in order that Jesus could have his ministry. And even Satan understands God's justice and demands it for himself, not that he dispenses it to anybody else, or hasn't in the past anyway. So he had to be paid back the 2,000 days. And then, having been paid it back, everything was fair and square. And Jesus could then have the war of Revelation 12 and say, right, you've had your 2,000 days back, you've finished your 6,000-year lease, you've got to go. And you've got to hand over everything to me. And Satan said, get lost, I'm not doing that. So, war. And then it didn't take long. It took 8 days of Revelation 12 verse whatever it is, and then it took 6 days to throw Satan down. And that was after the 2,000 days. The 2,000 days began at the expiration of Satan's lease, which was 2012, which was 6,000 years after 3989 Nisan, which was 4 years after Adam sinned. And that's covered in, I think it's Understanding 27 on the site. It's basically, there was a jubilee after Adam sinned, before Adam became a priest. Being the firstborn of God, he had the right, and to his own sons. And you don't need to be a priest unless there's a satanic Caesar. If there's a divine Caesar, you don't need a priest. Actually, that's not quite true. Israel had a divine Caesar, and they had Aaron as a priest. Maybe because even though Israel had a divine Caesar, the nations around didn't. So there were no satanic Caesars until Satan got his lease, because it was Michael who ransomed Adam, not Satan. So Michael had all the power over Satan. He was both Caesar and he was secular and sacred king. He could choose a priesthood, he could do anything. He couldn't actually be both by divine law, but nonetheless, he owned Adam, having bought him. But he sold headship, secular headship to Satan for 6,000 years. That expired 2012, because it began 4 years after Adam sinned, 4 years being 48 months out of a 50-month jubilee, and then there were 2 months of appointment, from appointment to installation, 50 days. So Adam became a priest, Sivan 2012, on Pentecost, the Mosaic Pentecost, and he was appointed to be such at First Fruits, and Satan was granted a lease at First Fruits, a coincident with Adam's appointment to be a priest in order to deal. I mean, the whole purpose of the system we are leaving was that you had a satanic Caesar, and hopefully had a divinely appointed high priesthood, so that you had to choose between the two, and Jesus famously said, pay God's things to God and Caesar's things to Caesar. And this was the dichotomy that was to teach us both good and bad. Good from the priesthood, hopefully, and bad from the secular rulers. I mean, although sometimes it didn't work out like that at all. There were some secular rulers who were great and some priests who were terrible. But that in theory, it was good from the sacred and bad from the secular, but in practice it quite often was reversed. Nonetheless, we've had that lesson and are still having it. So once you understand that, you understand that the 2000 days begins in 2012 at first fruits, and it ends 2000 days later, which is 2017 Heshvan 10, I think. Yeah, first fruits is Nisan 16, 2012. So it ends Heshvan 6, sorry. And then there's an 8-day war of Revelation 12:7, that takes you to 2017 Heshvan 14. Then there's 6 days of eviction, that takes you to 2017 Heshvan 20. Then it's 30 days down Jacob's ladder, which is in the ark. It's the height in cubits of the ark. And that takes you to Chislev 20, and that's when 2017, and that is when human beings started to be possessed for a further 2000 days, which 2000 days takes you to 2023 Tammuz 10, when all demon possession ends. And then we have this fantastically brilliant plan where the nuclear part of World War III breaks out, and what the demons do is they manipulate a situation where mankind is just about to blow himself to smithereens with nuclear bombs, and then they leave us. They stop possessing, they walk off. And we do then nuke each other. And then they're able to say, look, see, we didn't do it. Those idiots did it. They nuked themselves. We didn't do anything. We didn't nuke them. We never pressed any red buttons. They did it. They're useless. Your human sons are crap. That's the game that's being played. The fourth horseman of the apocalypse rides from Tammuz 7, and the demons leave on Tammuz 10. So I think that's what they're going to do, if I've got that chronology right. Anyway, going back to the Gentile time, going back to Jesus becoming king. He's got to become king before the demons all leave. Once the demons leave, God becomes king. And we have the lava flood to wipe out all the faithless and loveless mankind. Now, Jesus cannot become king until a malediction called the Gentile times has ended. There are 3 types of malediction that mankind suffers. An exodenic times, which is when we don't have a promised land. An alienation times, which is when we don't get gifts of the Spirit, we cannot be sealed to get everlasting life, and we're alienated from God. He doesn't interact with us in the way that he does with the angels. I mean, he never does that. But so far, face to face. However, he does give us everything that the angels can have and more, when in an unseen way, when we are not alienated from him. So basically the 3 advantages of being one of God's people, and we're all one of God's people, is that you get God as your secular king, you get God appointing a priest representing him, and you get a promised land. You know, in Israeli terms, it was land of Israel, it was Moses and it was Aaron, or it was Moses' successors, which ended up being Davidic kings, or it was Aaron's successors, which ended up being his seed, his children. So these 3 things can be removed. A malediction is a removal of a blessing that you have. And the exodenic times, mankind has had 3 huge maledictions. One of promised land, one of priesthood, one of kingship. They all last 7 prophetic times, which is 7 times 360 years, which is 20 years. The exodenic times began when they were chucked out of Eden, and it lasted 20 years till they went in the promised land. They were thrown out of Eden 3993 Nisan 14, 15 actually. Adam sinned on 14. thrown out on 50, and he went into the promised land 20 years later precisely, on 1473 BC near San 15, and they ate the fruits of the promised land on that day, and that's the first day of cakes. The big alienation times malediction began 120 years before the flood, when God said, "My spirit shall not continue with mankind," this is Genesis 6, "in that he has sinned, or in that because he's flesh. Accordingly his days shall amount to 120 years, which is the wonderfully ambiguous scripture. Typical, that's how the Bible's written. One meaning was that in 120 years' time, mankind would cease to have a maximum lifespan of 960 years, which he had at the time that statement was made, and he had prior to the flood. Adam lived for 930 years. Methuselah lived 969, Jared lived 962. They were both non-Adamic. Everybody else lived less than 960. And then after the flood, from Arpachshad onwards, it was 480 max. So that's one reason. One fulfillment. The other fulfillment was that Moses, and from Moses on, Moses lived exactly 120 years to the day, and everybody who was born after Moses has a maximum lifespan of 120 years. The only person recorded in history to have done better than that is a French woman, but she did this deal where she got a flat if she lived a certain length of time. So she had a financial motivation to lie about her age. Not that women necessarily need a motivation to lie about her age, except that she lied. She represented she was older than what she really was. So that was a different one. And there's some guy who's investigating that on the basis that it was there was some kind of crookery went on with the birth certificate or something. So with the exception of the French woman, nobody's managed to live more than 120 years since Moses. Actually, that isn't true. There have been some non-Adamic people who've lived that long. Jehoiada was one of them. Another one who lived longer than that. Jehoiada lived 130 years. Jesse lived longer than 120 years if you work it all out. Anyway, that's when the alienation times began. It ended with Pentecost 33 CE, which was 20 years later, when gifts of the Spirit poured out, and when the apostles were sealed into the angelic ransom covenant. They were given everlasting life, which actually was a wedding present from God to Jesus, when Jesus became the head of God's second wife, which was the second Holy Spirit. His first wife was headed by Satan. Satan screwed up, and God got a divorce. He's on his second wife now, as many of his sons are. Like father, like son. So that's the alienation times. Now that ends at Pentecost, and there are three main festivals that Jews had to attend every year: cakes, Passover cakes, Pentecost, and booths. The exilic times goes from cakes to cakes. The alienation times goes from Pentecost to Pentecost, and therefore the Gentile times goes from booths to booths, first day of booths to first day of booths. So what that means is that Jesus will be no longer maledicted from being our Caesar on Tishri 15 of a certain year. And the last year that can possibly be is this year, because the demons are all finished, and therefore the way is made for God to be Caesar before Tishri 15 next year. And in fact, God becomes Caesar on Tishri 5 next year. However, using purely the two periods of 2,000 days, with the 14 days of the war and the eviction between them, and the 30 days of the being chucked down, saying Jacob's ladder, it's impossible to stretch the Gentile times to next year. It has to end the malediction this year. And then we get on to this wonderful piece of logic, which I very much enjoy, which is, if I can, it's this: the Gentile times malediction. It was caused by the idolatry of physical Israel, and it cannot extend further than Satan's lease. Yeah, I should have used this before. And of course Satan's lease doesn't extend further than the demons being down here. And the reason it can't extend further than Satan's lease is that a malediction is a removal of a blessing, and the blessing is having God as king under Satan's lease. Once his lease is gone, God is king anyway. I mean, you can't you can't have a satanic Caesar when his lease has gone. And actually you don't need, but you can't have a satanic Caesar after the end of Satan's lease, plus lease extensions, plus everything he's got to be repaid. You know, once his authority is gone, there cannot be a Gentile times, because it's not possible to have a satanic Caesar. And a Gentile times is a malediction whereby you have a satanic Caesar. And so since the demons are all finished in 2023, Tammuz 10, and since the satanic lease must be up by then, the Gentile times has to end Tishri 15 this year. Furthermore, when the Gentile times ends at the end of Satan's lease. Because if he hasn't got a lease, there can't be a Gentile times. So not only do we know that the Gentile times ended Tishri 15, we know that Satan's lease ended Tishri 14, because leases end on the 14th of the month. That's the Passover. Not of an angel or of authority or of people. You know, Passover in any sense you want. It's the 14th. Now, that's an easy way to prove it, I say. There's another way to prove it, which is more precise, but let me do it. So it starts off with the Reverend John Aquila Brown, who worked out that from Daniel 4 that the 7 times of this tree being chopped down represented the Gentile times. In fact, it doesn't. It represents the alienation times and the exodemic time. The tree provided food. It didn't really provide rulership. It's an exodemic times. But the band of iron around it, that did represent rulership. And the band of copper around its roots, that did represent priesthood. Copper is priestly because everything in the temple of Solomon was made out of copper. Iron is rulership because it's unbreakable, rigid law, unbreakable righteousness. Iron scepter, nobody had a copper scepter. So the tree itself is exodemic, the iron band is Gentile, and the copper band is alienation. He wasn't wrong, he didn't see it 100% clearly, but I don't blame him at all. He saw it, which was brilliant. He saw that there was a second meaning, a second symbolism. It was quadratic in symbolism. He saw that the symbolic meaning of that tree being chopped down wasn't just that Nebuchadnezzar would lose 7 years of his kingship and have it restored. He saw that really the Bible is not the story of Babylon, it's a story of Israel and God's people. And what would happen is that one of God's kings would lose his kingship for 7 times and then have it restored. And the 7 times wasn't 7 years, it was 7 years taking a day for a year, or 7 years of years, or 7 times 360 years, or 20 years. And he had it beginning, did Reverend John Aquila Brown in 1823, had it beginning in 604, which is when Nebuchadnezzar was, that was the first year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And Russell changed it to be 607, which was correct, but the way he deduced it was completely incorrect. He moved the fall of Jerusalem to 607 from 586, which was ridiculous. But anyway, by making a series of mistakes, he got the correct start date of 607. What actually happened in 607 was that Pharaoh Necho appointed Jehoiakim, after having defeated Josiah, to replace Jehoahaz. And Jehoiakim paid tribute to Necho, and you pay Caesar's things to Caesar. So Necho became Caesar to Israel when Jehoiakim exacted a tribute and acted as his tax collector. That occurred, well, the first Day of Booths after that occurred was 607 Tishri 15. That was the beginning of the malediction of God's people, the Jews, paying taxes to a Caesar who was not representing God. I mean, you know, Pharaoh Nietzsche was not in the Davidic line. He wasn't Jewish. So Russell started the Gentile Times 607 Tishri 15, so he ended it 1914 Tishri 15, which seemed like a really good guess when the First World War broke out, which looked like it would turn into Armageddon. But it did not. And 1914 Tishri 15 was not the end of the Gentile Times, because everybody, including the Jehovah's Witnesses, continued to pay taxes not to Jesus, but to the IRS or to HMRC in this country. So plainly, it wasn't the end of the Gentile Times, because well, if it was, they were paying taxes to the wrong people and disobeying the word of God, which is that you should pay your Caesar's things to Caesar, and if Caesar was Jesus, then you shouldn't be paying any tax to the IRS or to the HMRC. But they were. So that wasn't the end of it. And then the wonderful Dr. Stephen E. Jones, who was from the Worldwide Church of God, realised that there was a Maccabean gap in the Gentile Times because, I mean, he didn't, well, for whatever reasons he saw it. What he didn't do is get that gap quite right. In fact, it began at the first day of Booths, 144 Tishri 15 BC, after Demetrius II granted Jonathan Maccabeus an exemption from paying tribute to Caesar. There was actually a letter from Demetrius II, the Greek ruler, Seleucid king of Israel, who said, don't pay your tax to me, pay it to the temple. Incredible letter. He's saying, your Caesar is God. The letter literally said, pay your taxes to the temple, not to me. I don't want them. Pay it to the temple. Which is saying, pay your taxes to God. Which is saying that I'm no longer your Caesar and God is. Which is saying that the Gentile Times has ended. Couldn't be clearer. And then 98 years later, Julius Caesar came along and he said the opposite. He said, I'll tell you what, pay your tax to me. And he appointed Antipater, the Idumean ethnarch of Judea. And the previous guy was a kind of Roman vassal, but he didn't collect any tax. I think it was Herodotus or somebody. But this guy, Antipater, did. So 46 Tishri 15 is when tribute started being paid to Julius Caesar, actually. So that produced a 98-year Maccabean gap, and all credit to Dr. Stephen E. Jones of the Worldwide Church of God, which is now defunct. But his brilliant piece of research is not defunct. It was correct, but he didn't quite have the right length or the right time period. So that adds 98 years, but all that does is take you to 2012 Tishri 15 now, instead of 1914. And regrettably in 2012 Tishri 15 everybody was still paying tax to the IRS and they were still paying tax to the HMRC in this country. And so Jesus did not become Caesar in 2012. And then along came yours truly, who realised there was a further gap in the Gentile Times, which was caused by evil Merodach in Babylon, when he raised up the throne, would you believe, the very throne of Jehoiachin, who was a prisoner in Babylon, took him out of prison, changed his clothes, which was nice of him, probably a good idea if he was going to sit in front of the king, and raised up his throne above all the other thrones in Babylon. In other words, restored the kingdom to a Davidic king over Israel. And that carried on for 10 years until 550 Tishri 15 from 560 Tishri 15. So there was a 10-year exilic regnal gap where rather than a satanic king, evil Merodach, being the king of Israel, it was Jehoiakim himself who got 10 years there. So that extended it to 2022. And that's all covered in Understanding 121 and Understanding 123 in trueBibleCode.com in more detail. And in order to believe that, you've got to, it doesn't matter. You see, you don't have to accept that the Jehovah's Witnesses were anything other than a bunch of researchers, which they were. And you don't have to accept that the Worldwide Church of God was anything other than a bunch of researchers, which they were. And you don't have to accept that this church is anything but a bunch of researchers, which we are. And so is Dr. Stephen E. Jones today, I'm sure. But all three of us, four of us, Russell, John Aquila Brown, Dr. Jones and myself, have had parts of this puzzle. And the end result of it is that on 2022 Tishri 15, the malediction did end. Now, that would mean that you do not have to pay tax to Caesar at that point. He has no right to tax you, although that wouldn't really be enforced necessarily. It wouldn't be a sin to pay tax until Jesus himself becomes Caesar, and he becomes Caesar on Chislev 15 because he gets appointed on Tishri 16, which is festival first fruits after the festival Sabbath of the first day of booths, and then 50 days later he's installed on Chislev 5, which is actually the 5th, so a Pentecost. He's installed over Abraham on that day. He's installed over Adam on Chislev 6, because that works not on festival Sabbath first fruits, but on Mosaic first fruits, counting from the Passover on Tishri 14, and that was Tishri 17, and so the Pentecost goes to Chislev 6. And then he was appointed over Isaac on, who are the water-baptized Lord's Witnesses, non-Adamic, on Heshvan 16, and appointed over Cain on Heshvan 22, and installed over Isaac on Tebeth 5, and installed over Cain on Tebeth 11. But to most people, next week, on the Sabbath, which is Friday, Saturday, coming, today being the 26th, Saturday the 26th, so it will be of November, so it's December the 3rd, so December 2nd, 3rd, on that Sabbath, if you're non-Adamic Abrahamic, you don't have to, you should stop paying taxes. And if you're on the next day, if you're non-Adamic, sorry, if you're just Adamic, if you're just a son of Adam, if you have faith in Jesus, you will stop paying taxes. But I'm not asking anybody to do that, because we need some confirmation. My chronology has not hitherto been 100% accurate, so one would want some confirmation. I mean, there will come a time when Jesus is Caesar, when one should not pay tax to anybody other than him. Obviously, because the command is that you should pay Caesar's things to Caesar, and hitherto Caesar has been the governments of this world, and therefore you should pay tax to them. But when they cease to be divinely appointed, then you should not pay tax to them, because you're funding Satan rather than Jesus Christ. And that will occur at some point. Now I'm going to give the simplest method of all. Well, there's two simple ways of deducing when it occurs. Well, the simplest probably is this. The second fire sign of 2 Kings, of 1 Kings 18, occurs on Chislev 5, 2022, the very day that Jesus becomes Caesar to Abraham. The reason for that is that Satan wants to give him a welcoming present. He is not keen on Jesus becoming Caesar to his people. He wants to screw that up. He wants a massive distraction. He's not going to sit there and say, "Here you are, Jesus, have the microphone." He's not going to do that. He's going to create World War III. He's going to do everything he possibly can to distract from Jesus becoming Caesar. And when you see the distraction of the terrorist attack or whatever it is on Chislev 5, which will produce a mushroom cloud, non-nuclear, not I mean, it might be a dirty bomb, but not conventional nuclear. There cannot be any nuclear bombs until all the faithful are in the ark. God will not permit it. The chosen ones have to be in the ark before nuclear war breaks out. It will break out, but 50% of mankind will be saved into the ark before it does. It will break out, if I'm right, Tammuz 7 next year, or Tammuz 10 perhaps, after the demons leave. And everybody who's faithful will be in the ark by Tammuz 7, which is the beginning of the ride of the fourth horseman of the apocalypse. So it's very interesting. One doesn't want to not pay tax too early, otherwise you've committed a criminal offence and you've been a complete idiot and you screwed everything up. So right now I'm saying nothing other than there will be a time when we should stop paying tax, and that time will be heralded by a mushroom cloud, a bomb producing a mushroom cloud above the Thames, round about Dartford, or a bomb above the Hudson producing a mushroom cloud over Manhattan, maybe round about the George Washington Bridge. And that bomb I've been predicting for 16.5 years, and I've got it wrong. Every prediction I've made, maybe 700 of them. And we now predict it for next Sabbath. So we're predicting it for December the 1st to December the 4th, it being taking it one day either side of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is Chislev 5, which is December 2, 3. So December 1, 2, 3, 4, you should see a supposed terrorist attack, which is in fact a satanic distraction, which will occur east of London or in Manhattan, producing this mushroom cloud above the river, Thames or Hudson, and it's a fulfillment of the cloud rising from the sea that Elijah in 1 Kings 18 asked his attendant to look out for. So if you don't understand the Gentile times, if you don't understand or accept the 2,000 days of demon possession payback and the 2,000 days of further demon possession, if you don't accept or understand the 70 weeks from the beginning of the Reformation, from the first Act of Parliament to this year, don't worry. Look out for the sign. I would say make an attempt to understand it. Read Understanding 659 and see what you can get from it. But if you don't understand it, then just wait till December 1, 2, 3, 4, and when you see the thing I've been predicting for 16.5 years actually occurring, that means that Jesus has become Caesar, because Satan needs to start a distraction and to say, look, there's nothing going on there. Look, there's going to be a world war, all right? You might get blown to pieces. Focus on that. That's what he's going to be saying. He needs to do something to upstage and eclipse the return of the Christ in kingdom power. And he's got that already planned out. So that's the simple way. Now, there are some other actually very, very simple proofs, but they all have to do with his church. So you probably won't accept them. But they're all in Understanding 659, but here is a really nice one, which I rely on. You see, it says in Daniel 12, chapter 12, verse 12 or 13 or something, it says, "Oh, the happinesses or blessings of the one keeping in expectation, and who reaches to the 1335 days." So the naive interpretation is, well, it stands for 1335 days. The sophisticated interpretation is that happinesses or blessings is a Hebrew plural, so it counts for 3 times. And the one keeping in expectation and reaches it, he's keeping in expectation for 1335 days, and he reaches 1335 days. So that's 2. I mean, in the literal meaning, yes, it's only 1335 days, yes. But in the greater meaning, he's doing two things. He's keeping in expectation for 30 and 35 days, and he then reaches the 30 and 35 days. So there's two lots of them. But the whole thing's multiplied by 3, because it's the happiness is blessings, and that is a Hebrew plural, and that counts 3 times, because there's a jewel that counts as 2 times. A Greek plural counts as 2 times because there is a jewel, but they don't bloody use it. I mean, you know what Greeks like, they've got everything. But they don't actually, you know, modern, well, Greek very, how can I say, it doesn't really use its jewel. So a Greek plural is 2 times, a Hebrew plural is 3 times. So what you should do is multiply this 30 and 35 by 2, because you keep in expectation and you reach, and then multiply it by 3 because it's the happinesses, the blessings. Now it's true that the plural is a polite plural. It means the happiness. It doesn't actually mean the 3 happinesses or the multiple happinesses. But nonetheless, that's what it's written, and every gender, every case, every number, singular, plural or dual, of every letter, of every particle, every letter of the law will be fulfilled. So you have to fulfill the fact that it's plural. You have to. That's the command from Jesus. So we're going to fulfill it. So it's 3 times 2 times 30 and 35, which is 8010. 8,010 days of expectation. Now this church started being in expectation when it began, when I baptized the first person into it, Tony. I did that on 2000 LL16. And if you count 8010 days after that, you get to 2022 Chislev 16. If you count it inclusively, Chislev 15. That is the date of the beginning of the rapture of actually Abrahamic Second New Covenant saints from this church. Not quite this church, they're associated with this church. They're Laodiceans. They will have joined up with us, but we keep arm's length from them until they're raptured. So that's one fulfillment. Then I baptized the second person, Jamie, at which point we had 3 people in the church, and therefore we could hold a judicial committee and church law could be enacted, could be enforced. So we became a proper congregation on Tishri 16 when I baptized Jamie. And if you count 8010 days or 8,010 days from then, BLC, you end up on 2022 15. That's when I'm raptured, and the tuft of hair of Ezekiel 8 is raptured, counting it inclusively. And I cannot be raptured unless Jesus is my Caesar. He can't just say, "Oh, Gordon, go in the ark." It doesn't work like that. What God does, is he does everything righteously with law. So before Jesus can rapture anybody, he has to become their Caesar, he has to become their secular boss. When he's their secular boss, he can do something secular with them, like transfer them into his ark. And so, since the first rapture occurs on Chislev 15, that must mean that Jesus is installed as Caesar to those people by that date, and they're Abrahamic, those guys who go up. I'm Isaiah, and this whole church is Isaiah, but the Laodicean branch of it will be Abrahamic. They presently are Abrahamic. They're non-adamic, Abrahamic. So what that means, since they most definitely go up 80-10 days after I baptize the first person, I mean, that's a fixed date. I mean, in order to believe this, you have to believe that I'm basically Daniel and that I'm running the true church. If I'm not, nobody will be raptured on those days. Or maybe somebody will, but no, it won't, because the church wouldn't have started when we started. If there's another true church, then this interpretation is wrong. But if we're the true church, it's right. So what will happen, Jesus cannot rapture anybody on Chislev 15 unless he's been installed. And the installation date is the 5th of the month, because it's a Zoa type Pentecost. So he must have been installed on Chislev 5. So he must have been appointed on Tishri 16. So Satan's leaves must have ended on Tishri 14. That's another way to deduce it. That's probably quite a simple way to deduce it, but it's dependent upon you accepting that this is the true church. So it's a very circular argument for anybody who doesn't accept that. But we will see whether that happens or not. It will be a very interesting test, a very exciting test actually, because the scripture says that about Daniel, that you will stand up for your lot at the end of the days, and when you're raptured, when I'm raptured, that's what will happen. And I will rest. It says you will rest. And in the ark you rest because you have Jesus as Caesar in the ark. I mean, you rest from having to, make this judgment all the time of what I've got to live in this satanic world, but I've got to behave in a non-satanic way. How do I do that? You don't have to bother about that in the ark because everything won't be satanic. So you're going to have a Caesar there'll be no conflict between the secular and the sacred. There'll be no conflict, hopefully, between your conscience and the laws of the government. And you get a rest from all the grief of this world. Although it's not much of a rest. Well, it'll be a wonderful rest, but the trouble is the whole world is still suffering. So, and of course, when you're raptured, you can then interact with the earth, which is great. That's a whole other talk. So, there you go. There's some proofs of it. But a wicked and a generation and an adulterer seeks a sign. And they're not prepared to do the work in the absence of the sign. And by the time they get the sign, it's too late to do the blooming work. But then we get the gifts of the Spirit. And thank God we do, otherwise we'd be screwed. So all is not lost. So my advice would be do the work. Start now. Look at understanding 659. If I've got it wrong, improve it. Let us know if you see any mistakes. Or if you've got more important things to do, then wait until December 1, 2, 3, 4, when, if I'm right, there'll be this sign. If I'm wrong, there'll be a sign of a rapture. Anyway, let's see. So, 7 days' time, next weekend, or the day before, or the day after, there should be this thing I've been predicting for 16.5 years, and which is actually fulfilled, Numbers 14. And then, when you see it, you know that Jesus is King. And incidentally, as regards not paying taxes, I mean, one should pay taxes if one gets a direct service for it, like sewerage or something. So, but we're not at that point yet. But it's a theoretical thing. But I think it'll become practical once Jesus is Caesar. We should not pay taxes if you believe in Jesus to anybody other than him. So that would be an interesting situation to be in. And it'd be funny if we go to court, because Satan will not be able to. If you go to court too early and I've got the date wrong, we'll be screwed. But if I've got the date right and you go to court, you cannot be screwed. What will actually happen is that the demons have no choice. They will have to either not hold the court case or just vacate it, or whatever they do. They'll try and do it in such a way that doesn't say, well, actually, you're right, we're not Caesar anymore. But that's an exciting and interesting prospect to look forward to. Thank you.